Hello, my beautiful friends. I am so excited to share something that I have been building for over a year. Now, many of you have heard me mention the weekly Health RX by Avanti. So let me tell you more about what it is and why I built it with my co-founder, Dr. Thamit Sethi, who is an integrative medicine physician and one of the most brilliant clinicians that I know. The two of us built this because we were both so tired of watching women in midlife trying to do everything they could to feel better and still not feeling well and not feeling like themselves. And then honestly, I became one of the women that we were trying to help. After chemotherapy for breast cancer, I went into medical menopause overnight. One day I had estrogen and the next day I didn't. And I found myself struggling with so many of the same things that other women in midlife are struggling with. The sleep that falls apart at 3 a.m., the brain fog, the weight that won't budge no matter what you do, the mood swings that you don't recognize, and the energy that crashes by 2 p.m. And honestly, nothing was enough. Not my medical training, not the generic wellness advice that was out there, not for me and not for the women that I have been trying to help for most of my career. So we built something different, the weekly Health RX. You can think of it like a physician in your pocket or your doctor in your pocket. Every week you get a short audio prescription from Thamit and me built around your biology, around your Ayurvedic dosha or mind-body constitution. You get the science behind why generic advice has failed so many women going through perimenopause and menopause. And you get a like-minded community to build you up and cheer for you on your healing journey. This is how we end the guessing game for women in midlife, for women in perimenopause and menopause. No more wondering what works for your body. No piecing it together alone, because it's not in your head. It's in your dosha. Generic advice does not work. Personalized prescriptions do. So if any of this resonates with you, join us over on Substack. Go to weeklyhealthrx.substack.com. It's linked in the show notes for you. And you can sign up for free. That's where you start. And when you're ready to go deeper, the paid version is just $20 a month, less than one latte or green smoothie a week. And inside the paid subscription, that's where you get your prescription. Rooted in tradition, backed by science, personalized for you. So many of you have been with me on this podcast for the past 5 years, and you know what I believe, that healing isn't just possible, it's in your power. The Weekly Health RX is the next chapter of my work. I am so excited to share this with you, and I hope that you'll come with me. Hi, I'm Dr. Avanti Singh, and this is the Healing Catalyst Podcast. I'm a medical doctor with over 20 years of experience and also a lifelong practitioner of Ayurveda. I created the Healing Catalyst Podcast because we all deserve a different kind of conversation about health, one that's honest, holistic, and rooted in both science and soul. On this show, I'm joined by the world's leading experts to give you science-backed tools that you can start using today and actually stick with to build real health and longevity. I am so glad you're here. Now let's get to it. Hello, my beautiful friends. Welcome back to the Healing Catalyst Podcast. I'm Dr. Avanti Singh. We are back with the Summer Reset series, and we are continuing with food this week and going deeper on spices, because spices are truly medicine. If you're new here, every other Tuesday this summer, we are bringing back conversations from our back catalog of over 200 episodes that I keep returning to and recommending to everyone. Today, we're bringing back one of my conversations with Dr. Kanchan Koya, who also happens to be one of the people that I trust most on the science of food as medicine. Kanchan has a PhD in biochemistry from Harvard. She's also the founder of Spice Baby, a platform that is dedicated to spices as medicine. And she's the author of the Spice Baby cookbook, the first self-published cookbook ever featured on the Today Show. I wanted to bring back this conversation because most of us are missing something that's hiding in plain sight in our kitchens. And that's the spices that we use every day. We think that spices are seasoning. Yes, they give flavor to food, but they're not just seasoning. They are some of the most concentrated medicine that we have. Actually, the most concentrated medicine in nature, higher in antioxidants and polyphenols than almost any vegetable that you can put on your plate. In this episode, Kanchan and I get into why spices work in synergy, not in isolation. We also talk about the traditional spice blends that every Ayurvedic and ancient cuisine has been making for thousands of years, and why turmeric in your meal is doing something completely different than turmeric in a pill. Now, one important thing to remember is that spices and which spices your body needs specifically depends on your dosha. Yes, there are some that are good for everyone, absolutely. But, a pitta needs more cooling spices because they run hot. And cooling spices help to bring the digestive fire down and into more harmony. Vata needs more warming spices because vata runs cold. And warming spices help to ground the body. Finally, kapha needs more stimulating spices because kaphas tend to run a little heavier and slower. And these stimulating spices can help to wake up the system. Spices like coriander, ginger, and black pepper are all doing different work depending on who's eating them. And this is exactly why Dr. Thamit Sethi and I built the Weekly Health RX. Personalized prescriptions for your body and your biology in midlife are really important. Now, here's my conversation with Dr. Kanchan Koya. Hi, Kanchan. I am so excited to have you back on the podcast again. Thank you for doing this with me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Avanti. I love talking to you anytime.
I know. I love talking to you too. Every time I'm in New York, we always meet up for lunch and it's like nonstop talking for however long we're together. So I'm excited to do this with you. And I'm really excited to talk to you about spices and food as medicine and sort of this whole new topic of longevity, since I have a book on longevity coming out. I thought, who else would I talk to about spices and food as medicine besides Kanchan Koya? So I'm super excited to dive into all things longevity-based spices and food with you. Ready?
I'm very honored. Thank you. I can't wait.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I just want to dive right in. Let's talk about, both of us are South Asian. We come from a culture where spices are medicine, right? And an Ayurvedic sort of perspective that we grew up with, where food is medicine and we use spices in different combinations for their medicinal purposes, right? And of course, Western medicine has finally sort of caught up to the fact that there are all of these very, very beneficial components of spices. And I know so much of your work is around really teaching people about those benefits, the health benefits. So let's talk about maybe just in general, what are some of the spices that I know you've studied some of these for their health benefits, but which ones do you think are sort of the ones that we maybe could just focus in on for health benefits, longevity? We can kind of go in any direction that you want to, but maybe we start with longevity or Ayurvedic perspective. Yeah.
So, I think it's helpful for people to understand just at the outset what makes spices so amazing. And this is not just because you and I are saying they're amazing or because everyone from India thinks they're amazing or other countries that celebrate spices, but, thousands of years ago, wars were waged and conquests were undertaken to monopolize the spice trade because people understood something about these magical ingredients from nature. And just very simply, when people ask me, like, okay, we know we should be eating more fruits and vegetables and plant foods, so why spices? Like, what's special about them? What's special about them is that they exist at the interface of the plant and its environment, right? So, technical definition of a spice is the root, the bark, the seed, the flower, the leaf would be an herb, but let's just say interchangeably, herbs and spices are one thing. These are parts of the plant that interact with the surroundings. And so, what makes these parts of the plant really important is that they have to defend the plant. So, a lot of spices, all spices, herbs, contain what we call plant defense compounds. These are just chemicals or compounds that the plant produces to defend itself against UV light, predators, little microbes, the elements. And what happens is that those compounds defend the plant, but if we ingest them through the food we eat or the teas that we drink, we are actually creating more cellular resilience, and we are getting some of those benefits that the plant gets from its own defense compounds. So that's and because spices exist at the interface of the plant and the environment, they're very highly concentrated in these plant defense compounds. So all vegetables are great, all fruits are great. We should eat the rainbow for sure. But spices have some of the highest concentrations of these antioxidants, these anti-inflammatory chemicals, these other compounds, these polyphenols, we call them, just sort of umbrella term. So they are really special in the plant kingdom. It's not just because we like the way they taste, which they do taste amazing, but it is really something very unique about this class of kind of ingredients from nature, because of where they're found in nature.
Right. And so that's a really interesting way of thinking of it, is that they're at that intersection between the actual plant or nature and the environment and nature, sort of that interface. So they have more of the defense mechanisms. Because, a lot of times people will say, well, you can get all of those, really, really beneficial health benefits from the actual food, which you can. But I think what you're saying is that you're actually going to get even more from the spices because they're so much more concentrated and it is a defense mechanism, right?
Yeah. And it's not an either or. And this
Right.
is the thing, like you can eat plain spinach, but it's very hard to eat plain turmeric. I mean, I don't recommend it. And we can get into why that's probably not the best way to eat it anyway. But spices are always consumed traditionally as part of food. So instead of making it an either or discussion, like should I concentrate on spices or should I concentrate on fruits, vegetables, nuts and seeds, whole grains, legumes, lentils, all the good stuff? No, you should actually combine them because two things happen. You get intense flavor enhancement.
Sure.
And at the end of the day, we eat for nourishment, but we also eat for joy. And I would argue that's really important for health. And then you get these highly concentrated polyphenols, antioxidants as part of your food. And I truly believe, and I've said it on record, that if you are eating the rainbow and you are eating a diverse plant-centric diet because you're trying to honor your health, but you're not including spices, you're literally leaving something on the table.
For sure. Absolutely. I mean, it's like you're not adding that medicinal, sort of booster that you can have, right? To enhance flavor, but also enhance the health benefits of the food, right? Why would you do that? But I want to go back to something that you said is that, you wouldn't recommend eating a spice alone. Let's dive into that because, I think that there is this misconception that we can just put all of these spices into a little capsule and take those, and that somehow is going to replace putting the spices in the food or eating them with our food, right? This is a debate that I know goes on a lot in Western medicine and integrative medicine. We've talked about it before. So let's just dive into that. Why is it that you would suggest not eating turmeric by itself versus eating it in food?
Yeah, so a couple of things. First and foremost, I think it's pretty icky on its own. If it's the powdered form, I don't even know how you would have it on its own. I mean, you could add it to a golden milk, but then it's not on its own. It's with a milk and it maybe has some ginger and clove and other spices in it. So it's a preparation. I think this idea that we are going to find some sort of silver magic bullet in one ingredient that we can just double down on and overdose on and experience optimal health is a very Western reductionist mindset. And I think the reality is, and I've learned this from you, like if we emulate nature, nature is never about one thing. It's about harmony and kind of integrating all the elements. And so the food is very similar. And when it comes to spices or any food, we know that it exists within a food matrix. It's not just like the one compound in turmeric, curcumin, that you're finding in turmeric.
Right.
We actually know that spices have multiple compounds.
Mm-hmm.
We may have studied one,
Right.
so you can take that one isolated and put it in a pill, but what about all the others that we haven't yet identified? And the studies that have looked at the benefits of spices have always looked at whole spice consumption as part of a meal versus some sort of isolated compound in high enough doses in a capsule. That said, I do think, if someone is struggling with severe inflammatory condition like arthritis or something, and they want to include the anti-inflammatory benefits of turmeric at high enough doses, maybe a well-formulated supplement has a place. But I would never recommend supplements over food because of the food matrix, because we as researchers don't really understand everything that is in the food. So how are we supposed to isolate and enrich it?
Right, right. And it also goes to something, this reductionist sort of approach is that when you isolate that compound, right? Let's take turmeric. That's an easy one to talk about, right? Isolating the curcumin as the anti-inflammatory sort of agent, right? We know that we've studied that. But when you isolate it, you're taking it out of its natural habitat, right? Which is, in the root of the turmeric, right? With the skin, with all of the other things that are going on, the other components of turmeric. And I do think that you're losing probably some of the health benefits. You might be isolating the anti-inflammatory piece, but what about everything else that can happen from turmeric that you lose because you're not using it in its natural form, right? In how you're preparing it in the food. That I think is important to think about too.
100%. And I don't know that we will ever have a conclusive study because I don't think there's incentives to study that kind of stuff. But I think when I check in with my own intuition and it makes a lot of sense that there is something special about the food in its habitat. We don't just eat like beta carotene in pill form. We eat carrots, right? And we prepare them in beautiful, delicious ways. So I think we need to move away from this idea that it's like 5 silver bullets in capsule form are going to save us. Like ultimately, it's this harmony from nature in its natural form where the medicine truly lies.
Yeah. And so I think what you're getting at is sort of this balance, right, between what we're finding in Western medicine and all the studies. And, you were a biochemist. You've done the research on these spices, right? Isolating it in the lab and really studying it to understand what is the beneficial part of a different spice or compound, sort of balancing that data with this ancient wisdom of how we would eat, right? And I find that I'm always, sort of bumping up against that in everything that I talk about with Ayurveda, because again, the whole book that I just wrote on longevity is really about bringing those two together and sort of like, where's the harmony, So I think what you're speaking to is sort of like coming at it from that perspective also. Right, is what are the scientific studies and the benefits showing us versus how can we really use it in our life to not only nourish us, but also to promote joy, right? As you talk about.
Yeah.
It's really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really, really important. So, what I would really like to jump into is maybe you could explain some of the mechanisms around, how do spices, specifically when we're talking about longevity and promoting longevity. There's a couple of different pieces, right, that I write about in the longevity formula, which is to increase cellular repair and to decrease inflammation. What are some ways, or what are some spices that specifically maybe help to increase cellular repair? Let's start with that, and then maybe I'll ask you about inflammation too.
I love that framework of increasing cellular repair, decreasing inflammation for longevity. And I really do think that that might be one of the primary mechanisms. Both of those are really important mechanisms through which spices exert their benefits based on our understanding so far from the modern research and through effects on the gut microbiome, which then affect things like inflammation. So it all comes back to those kind of 2 pillars. I think the best example is turmeric, which is going back to good old turmeric. And I'll actually throw in moringa in there. Now, I know moringa is not technically a spice. We don't use it as a seasoning, but moringa leaves are used in different parts of the world as a vegetable. So let's say moringa is similar because it actually exerts this effect through a similar mechanism to turmeric, which is that curcumin and turmeric seems to activate our innate kind of cellular antioxidant status. And it does this through like just a molecular pathway that's called NRF2, which kind of boosts your cell's antioxidant resilience. And the reason we know that's important is because a lot of cellular damage seems to accumulate because of these reactive oxygen species, they're called. So these are just like little atoms that can react with things like protein and DNA and cause damage, cause things to get glued together in ways they're not supposed to. So when we have more antioxidant status in our cells, we get less of this free radical damage, is the hypothesis. And so turmeric, moringa, and many other compounds, matcha, a lot of plant foods can boost our cellular antioxidant status. And this is why when you take antioxidants in pill form, and this study has been done, you don't see the benefits you would think you would see. And that's because we take these compounds, we put them in a concentrated pill form, but when they exist as part of the natural food, they seem to be doing something different. They seem to be more potent. They're not just antioxidants, hanging around scavenging up these free radicals. They're really sending a signal. There's like a signaling happening to the cell, and the cell is saying, I need to rev up my own antioxidant status as a result of this incoming signal from this incoming food. So, food is not just calories, it's also a messenger, literally a signal to the body. And so I think turmeric is a great example, but really, a lot of spices seem to have this potent antioxidant effect. The other one is clove. Clove is actually thought to be one of the most highly concentrated antioxidant rich spices. So I love putting it in my masala chai, my spiced chai. Always get some cloves. You're making a curry, you can throw some cloves as the base in oil before you add in your aromatics. You can just suck on a little clove if you have a cough or a sore throat, because it has some of these this analgesic properties. So, I think there's going to be many more examples of spices that really do boost this kind of cellular repair by boosting the cell's antioxidant status. And then inflammation is where we have a lot of research. So I would say that's the area where spices have been studied the most. And what has been found is that spices contain compounds, so cinnamon, cinnamaldehyde, cumin, cuminaldehyde. Cloves have eugenol, turmeric has curcumin, paprika and chili have capsaicin, so on and on, these different compounds and others as yet unidentified that seem to inhibit chronic inflammation in different ways. So we know chronic inflammation is a complex kind of process. It has lots of components. So it's not about just like blocking one step. And the beautiful thing is different spices have different compounds that seem to block inflammation at different levels, which is why the studies that have been done in humans have looked at spice blends of spices. And this is actually how our ancestors and our grandmas and everybody cooked, It was rarely like, oh, turmeric is good for me. Let me just put like 5 tablespoons of turmeric into this dish. Like they would never do that.
Right.
So they would blend spices into garam masala or into a tandoori blend, or go to your favorite part of the world that uses spices, and they're usually used as parts of blends.
Right.
And the research suggests that when we use spices in combination as part of a blend in food, we can actually lower markers of inflammation after a single meal, which is amazing. So, yeah, I would say there's really great evidence now that we can manage systemic chronic inflammation and reduce it, boost cellular repair. And then the gut microbiome. We have research that shows that people who eat more spices have a more diverse array of gut microbes. And we know that diversity is really helpful when it comes to the gut microbiome, and that it can really then go on to support things like healthy inflammation. So again, all these systems are linked, as you well know, and as you describe in your book, and spices really seem to be acting on kind of multiple layers of our bodies and our physiology, which is why I love them so much.
Yeah. No, I love your description. So easy to understand, but I want to, dig into a couple of things that you said. The first is you talked about the signals that these spices actually give to cells when you're eating them in food, when you're, cooking them and not putting them just in a pill, which I think is such an interesting way of saying it, because I do think there is this there's energetic almost communication that is going on, which we can't discount. We don't have the proof of how it works, but there is something happening, right? There's some communication that's happening when you are ingesting the food with these spices that have all of these antioxidant sort of chemicals in them that are then speaking to our cells. And they're creating some kind of a reaction, cascade, synergy, whatever you want to call it, that is protecting the cell, right? That I think is super interesting. How did you come up? Like, I just want to understand, like, where did you get that? I mean, is that something that you've actually seen studies on? Because I haven't read, enough about this. Or is that sort of just an intuition you have about how this is working?
Yeah, no, I do think there are studies, and I think this is true for many beneficial compounds that are derived from nature, from the plant kingdom, that are showing benefits for things like cancer prevention. So the biggest example I would say is the cruciferous vegetables. So the cruciferous vegetables have been studied extensively because they have these beneficial compounds. People might have heard of the compound sulforaphane, which is found in things like broccoli sprouts and, also broccoli and cabbage and all the cruciferous vegetables. And it was researchers at Johns Hopkins that actually figured out that sulforaphane from cruciferous vegetables, also in pill form, but there's an interesting caveat there. And this is something that we can talk about because when you ingest a cruciferous vegetable or broccoli sprouts, you're actually chewing the vegetable that releases a compound, and that also releases an enzyme found in the same food, which then converts the compound into sulforaphane, which is of benefit. So sometimes the reason we want the whole food is because it's almost like a molecular process has to unfold, and all the components are present in the whole food versus in some isolated compound. And that doesn't mean that, if you take curcumin, you're not going to get some of this signaling that I'm talking about. So just to be fair, curcumin high dose supplement would give you some of these benefits. But what I'm saying is that the whole food is almost like set up to kind of unravel this molecular cascade so you can end up with this beneficial end result. And most importantly, like, we have to accept our limitations as humans, as researchers. Like, we don't know everything. So just because we found curcumin and turmeric, and that's the best studied compound, there's actually evidence that when you strip the curcumin away, you still have benefits in the turmeric. So if you just use the curcumin, you're kind of selling yourself short.
Right.
Right? Because you're missing out on all these other compounds. But yeah, just to go back, it has been studied and it's been looked at that sulforaphane, very similar to turmeric, activates cellular antioxidant status. And that's probably how it has some of these cancer preventative benefits.
Yeah. So again, we're coming back to sort of the same thing again and again, is that there are these benefits. We don't know exactly what they are, but we're getting some inclination about using the full spice in combination with food, which has these added benefits that we don't even know about, or that we know about, like you were talking about with the broccoli sprouts, right? There's another activator in that pathway. But then even when you were talking about inflammation, and this is another thing I wanted to dig into, is that I think it's so important to double click on this idea that when you are talking about inflammatory response, right? It's a whole complex system of cascade that happens. So many different things happening. And your point that what we're doing when we're using a spice blend is we're attacking that inflammatory process at different points in the pathway or in the cascade. So you have an increased anti-inflammatory effect rather than just hitting it at one point, right? With one spice or an isolation of that spice, the curcumin, right? Instead, when you have a multiple, sort of a blend of things happening, you're hitting it at so many more points, you're going to have a bigger anti-inflammatory effect, right?
Yeah.
If I understood you correctly.
Totally. Yeah. And Avanti, I can't emphasize enough how much I loved what you said about the energetic communication, because I think this is something we might never really unpack from a scientific perspective. We have limited tools when it comes to molecular biology. But, I think everyone listening to this podcast and I firmly believe and know that there is, I mean, everything is energy. I mean, Einstein
Yeah.
said it was as
Yeah.
fundamental as that. So why would food be any different? Why would spices be any different? And how these energetic kind of states or vibrations or whatever you want to call them interact with then our bodies, it's all energetic at the end of the day, just because we see it as these like finite forms because we're limited in that way. So I think that energetic communication is so fascinating to me. And I really do think like this is the work of Ellen Langer at Harvard, who does, it was a psychologist who looks at mindsets. Like, why does our mindset around how food is impacting us change how the food impacts us? It does. I mean, in her studies, right? So it's not woo woo and it's not like some, out there stuff. Like, if you eat spices with your food that is from nature and you understand that you are basically using gifts from nature to communicate with your body and nourish it from the inside out, that is very likely going to be the outcome.
Right. No, and I think you're hitting on a couple of really important points from an Ayurvedic standpoint, things that we talk about on this podcast a lot, which is that the energy body is the blueprint for the physical body. Right. That is what we believe in Ayurveda and even in yoga, these sciences that have been around for a long, long time, and that they're the blueprint. And so when you have a block in the energetic body, that's when you start to have problems, right? So why would it not be true that this food that's coming from nature, which has energy, has prana, would also be able to communicate with the energy body? So you're getting that effect, right? The cellular energetic communication, but you're also getting the physical effect of actually eating the food and the spice, right? And then it's coming in at that sort of physiological level that we're studying in Western science of hitting an inflammatory response at different, points, at different points in the cascade. So it's almost like you're getting two for one, right? It goes back to what you were saying, is that if you think that taking just an isolated pill is going to do the trick, you're losing things. You're leaving a lot of the benefits on the table, which I would say is that energetic component that you're losing.
Yeah. And if you think about a spice blend with like 15 spices, which is pretty much what we put in garam masala, you cannot recapitulate all those antioxidants and polyphenols in a pill. Like, there's
Right.
just no.
Right.
So again, it's like diversity is the spice of life. And that's true for spices as well.
So let's move now to sort of some of the specific components of spices that I know we hear about a lot in, these studies and in a lot of wellness podcasts, just so maybe you could explain sort of what they are. So the two that I wanted to sort of focus in on, and maybe you have others, are polyphenols, which we hear about a lot, and then catechins. Can you tell us sort of how those factor into sort of this longevity piece and how it supports health?
Yeah, I think it really does go back to your framework, Avanti, which is cellular repair and inflammation. So these are all fancy chemical terms for chemicals, compounds with different structures. They're really catechins, polyphenols, they're really different chemical structures. And unless you're really nerdy about chemistry, we don't really have to talk about it. Like, polyphenol has multiple phenolic rings. If you really are like, why is it called that? So the point is, nature is so smart and so wise and produces all these different structural compounds that are there for a reason. I mean, they have evolved over millions of years for a reason. Like we talked about at the outset, either to defend the plant, to be some sort of antimicrobial, to help the plant in some way better absorb sunlight or nutrients or whatever. So all we need to know is that spices are very, very enriched in these. Polyphenols, I think, are interesting because they're not just found in spices, they're also found in things like coffee and chocolate and other foods. And they really all seem to, at a cellular level, do the two things that you posit are really fundamental for healthy longevity, which is prevent that cellular damage by boosting repair. In some cases, also preventing damage, because, like we talked about, too much oxidative stress is going to cause damage, which then puts too much pressure on our cellular repair mechanisms. So you can boost cellular repair or you can lower cellular damage. avoiding things like smoking and like too much time around toxins and like eating less ultra processed foods and things like that, that are going to limit that influx of things that could damage our cells, our DNA, our proteins, and then also keeping that chronic inflammatory cascade in check. Because we know that we have a chronic inflammation epidemic. Most people are walking around with too much systemic chronic inflammation. So just going back to those compounds, I think there's many others. There's like flavonols and there's phytonutrients. It kind of all speaks to chemicals and plants that have, for the most part, beneficial effects in our bodies. And we should be trying to get a diverse array of them on a consistent basis.
Right. And so do you really want to make sure that you're sort of hitting all of those different chemicals to really boost sort of the synergistic effects, so you're going to have some polyphenols and some catechins and some flavonoids. Like, how important is that? Because again, this can get really confusing because we hear all these words thrown around of like, this food has this, chemical compound and this spice has this one. And it can get a little overwhelming of like, well, which ones do I concentrate on?
Yeah, I think the best advice that I can give and the way that I approach it is actually based on the research from the American Gut Project, which basically found that at least 30 different plant foods and spices and herbs are part of that a week seems to be a really great framework for optimal gut and overall health. And so if we're trying to support all of these mechanisms we've talked about, and we're like, where do I start? I tell people, are you getting 30 unique plant foods a week? Maybe that means you're trying a new spice or a new herb. Maybe that means when you go to the market and buy a vegetable, you go out of your normal rut and routine and pick up a new kind of root vegetable that you've never cooked with before, and you figure out how to make it, or a different kind of fruit. If we can ensure that plant diversity on a week-to-week basis and get out of what I really do think is like especially true in America, this kind of like food rut. Like we always buy the 5 same vegetables and then we watch the TikTok videos and then we make the same salad and prep it. And it's fine. Listen, people are busy and sometimes you need simple solutions. But the diversity is where the magic lies. So I don't think it's about like formulaically combining like 3 spices with 3 different vegetables. It's about constantly making sure you have that diversity week after week. And it's fun. Like no centenarian in the blue zone was trying to find the perfect formula for their bean chili based on polyphenols. They were adding all the local seasonal veg. So they were making a chili in the winter, which had a different kind of vegetables than in the spring. They were adding herbs, they were adding spices, they were having spice teas through the day. So they were just really receiving like all the bounty from nature and taking it all in with as much diversity and going back to that idea of joy as possible. Because like, I don't know, I would love to see a study where you compare 2 groups and they're both having a very, very delicious diet. A very, very like antioxidant rich diet, let's say. But one is actually having that joy component. I just really feel like that is very underestimated when it comes to its impact on health.
Right. So there's really no magic formula is what you're saying but I think this idea, this sort of this tool of, trying to have that diversity of at least 30 different plant foods, spices, throughout the week is a really good sort of just guideline to have in mind of like, okay, today I had 3 different spices. Okay. That's 3 out of 30. Like it's kind of an interesting way to go about it so that you don't get so hung up on what is in each of those, but you're eating as close to nature as you can. Right. I think that's a great idea.
And I think I always tell people when in doubt, go for spice blends, add more spices in combination. That seems to also be really important. So instead of just doing cumin or coriander or chili, add all 3.
Okay. Got it. What are some good, I have another question for you, but before we move from this, what are some good sort of like maybe a couple of different spice blends that are sort of good ones that you could have in your cabinet, next to the stove that are easy to add to, like different savory dishes or different sweet dishes, just to have around in like a spice box or like the little jars? What would you suggest would be some good ones that we could pick up?
I would say garam masala is great because you can find it at an Indian grocery store, online. You can make it if you really want. It does have quite a few spices. I have one in collaboration with La Boite, which is lovely, but you can get one anywhere.
We'll make sure we link that one in the show notes.
Thank you. I think if you think of most basic Indian cuisine, for example, vegetable preparations, they almost always have cumin, coriander, a little bit of chili, and turmeric. So even if you just combined those four and put them in a little jar and that became like your everyday spice mix, we actually have that as well as part of our line with La Boite. We called it everyday masala. But, again, you can make it at home. I also love some Middle Eastern blends. So I love this blend called Baharat, which is found in the Middle East. It's a little smoky and a little floral. You can add it to roast vegetables. So, I know people will sometimes do like salt, pepper, and garlic. I'm like, expand, add more spices, add a blend. You've suddenly introduced way more polyphenols, antioxidants, all those compounds that we're interested in. And then I also love a blend that you can sprinkle on things because that just makes it so easy. Like, say you make an avocado toast or you make a salad or you make some kind of like, I know cottage cheese is trending. So, like a cottage cheese something bowl, savory bowl. I love za'atar, which is sumac, white sesame seeds, and either oregano or thyme, even everything but the bagel seasoning. I mean, just anything that gets your palate excited and where you're seeing this diversity. So if you're going to pick one spice versus a blend, I would always pick the blend.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great tip, especially for, people who are super busy or overwhelmed, or maybe are sort of, just getting into cooking, right? We know that cooking at home is one of the best things we can do for our health because we know what we're putting into our food. We are sort of increasing that joy, and we're also sort of connecting with how we're nourishing our body, right? It goes back to that idea of when we really focus in on the nourishment, we are changing how our body is accepting that food and taking it in and how it is nourishing us, right? So cooking at home sort of supports all of those things that just have the health benefits, right? So I think that these ideas of spice blends is such a great sort of starting point. It's really accessible. It's a quick win, as I always talk about, right? Get a couple of those spice blends and just start adding them to your, even if you did that for the whole week and you started like, sort of experimenting of like, how does this one spice blend work with this, this preparation or on this preparation, and you kind of can see what you like and you don't like.
And to take it a step further, because I know a lot of people listening to this podcast obviously are interested in Ayurveda.
Yeah.
So we both know Divya, the amazing chef,
Yes.
and she has spice blends, I believe, for specific dosha types. And that's something that's really interesting to me. So I am a pitta dominant mind body constitution, which means that I love chilies, but they don't always love me back.
Right.
So I need to balance my hot spices. It's not that I can't have them. It's just that I
Right.
need to balance them with some of the cooling spices like the coriander, the fennel. She, like, for example, in the winter months, we want to balance vata. We want more of those grounding spices like ginger, a little bit of chili, maybe black onion seed. So even looking to Ayurveda for guidance around blends, I think can be really powerful.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before in this podcast, is that you can just even look into sort of the cooling or heating effect of the different spices if everything else is too overwhelming, and just think about how can you balance that. So in the cold months, you want to use some more warming spices to really balance that out with a little bit of the cooling, depending on your mind body constitution. But in general, we can use more of those heating, warming spices in the cold months. And so you can just focus in on that, and you don't even have to worry about all of the other health benefits. That'll give you the health benefits. I think that's what you're trying to say.
Yeah, as long as you're getting the diversity and variety. And yeah, I think the Ayurveda perspective is great to then, incorporate some of the energetics of the spices, which I think is really fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I want to ask you now about some specific, things that we talk about in longevity. So the first is autophagy and fasting. Are there any spices? Because I know, everybody's hearing about fasting, autophagy, just for everybody who's listening, right? Is that process in our body that helps to do the cellular cleanup, right? All the damaged, sort of junky old cell parts that are lying around that can cause this chronic low grade inflammation. Autophagy helps to clean that up. And that extends longevity, supports longevity as we get older. What are some spices that we could use? And fasting is one of the greatest stimulators of autophagy. So, what are some spices we could use to support fasting, support autophagy?
Yeah, so unfortunately, the research hasn't been done on spices and autophagy. I think it's an area, that is emerging. I definitely think fasting, circadian fasting, like we've discussed, in alignment with the rhythms of nature, making sure you're getting that overnight fast so you can really get into repair mode, making sure you're not eating too much food, like making sure you're eating the right amount for your needs. Because we also know that just being in a caloric deficit can boost autophagy, and then movement. All of these things boost autophagy.
Right.
So, kind of hitting all those things, which are great for overall metabolic health anyway. When it comes to spices, I do think that for some mind body constitution types like myself, excessive fasting can actually be kind of aggravating. So, pitta types who have very strong digestive fire, if we don't feed that fire with food, we don't give the fire something to work on, it can actually start to cause things like heartburn, gastric ulcers. So you'll hear people say, I can't fast, I get heartburn. That's not in their imagination. Like they might just be someone who, when they fast, it's too intense. It's too intense for the Agni and their constitution. So Ayurveda actually recommends teas, fennel tea or even CCF tea, which is CCFT, I know has cumin, coriander, and fennel, and the cumin can boost the Agni. So maybe in that case, you just want to do coriander and fennel, which are really cooling with a little bit of rose. So when I fast, I always do herbal teas and spice teas because I want to honor the fact that my mind body constitution can get overheated if I fast for too long. So if I'm doing anything longer than 13, 14 hours, I will usually sip on fennel tea. And it's really, really cooling and beneficial with a little bit of rose, a little chamomile, coriander, super helpful.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I mean, in the evening, if you're going to, sort of lighten up your meals and start your fast, your overnight fast, we're just talking about a circadian bath, 12 hours. That's all, I'm talking about. Sometimes just doing an herbal tea or a spice tea, right? An herbal blend can be really satisfying to help sort of just get you through that period of like, oh, I want a snack or I want to do this or that. And then you can start your fast and then be able to have that circadian sort of clean up, that autophagy that you want to have. So that might be a great idea. So CCF is a great idea. Rose, mint, any of those things that just help, that you like the flavor of, can help.
Totally.
And then I wanted to ask you about like some of these specific sort of chronic conditions that we have as we age. There's a lot of, literature out there and studies even about specific spices with specific chronic issues. So let's just clear up some of that. So let's talk about maybe diabetes. What are some spices that you think are beneficial for people that are, sort of trying to get their diabetes under control?
So when it comes to diabetes, again, I don't think there are silver magic bullets, but the spice that has been studied the most and that I think is worth considering, even if you're not diabetic and you just want to support good insulin sensitivity, good blood sugar control, is cinnamon. It's the one, there have been mixed results, but I think overall the body of evidence suggests that it can help lower blood sugar and improve insulin sensitivity. And I always tell people, if you're going to use cinnamon regularly, you want to go out of your way to find the varietal that we call true cinnamon or Ceylon cinnamon. Comes from the island country Ceylon or Sri Lanka. And the reason we want to do that is because regular cinnamon at high enough doses could be a problem for liver health because it contains this potential liver toxin called coumarin. But Ceylon or true cinnamon has very little, if any, coumarin. So cinnamon is a great one. Ginger has been looked at for its ability to balance blood sugar, and the results have been mixed. But I think ginger is just a fabulous spice anyway. It's great for bloating, great for digestion. You don't want to overdo it if you're of a heated constitution. So like pitta, like me, should not have like boatloads of ginger, but when balanced with other spices, it's amazing. And it has gingerol, which is an anti-inflammatory compound. So and so easy, and everyone can access ginger.
Yeah, that's an easy one. Okay, great. And then what about for heart disease? Any
Hmm.
spices that you could suggest?
I think we have to go back to the anti inflammatory spices because we know that with cardiovascular disease, there's a huge role that systemic, unchecked chronic inflammation plays. So it really seems to be this kind of um, perfect storm, if you will, of, a poor lipid profile, elevated triglycerides, chronic inflammation, stress, blood pressure. So I think when we think of it, anti-inflammatory spices, my favorites are turmeric paired with black pepper. That's something we've talked about before, that you want to ingest turmeric with black pepper to improve the bioavailability of the curcumin. Anything in the chili pepper family, even if it's not hot like paprika, is going to have some of these anti-inflammatory compounds like capsaicin. Sumac, which has anthocyanins, these plant pigments that are purplish, really, really beneficial for cardiovascular and brain health. And sumac is so easy to just sprinkle on anything. Almost like you would squeeze lemon on something, you could just do sumac. Clove, cinnamon, we mentioned, ginger, a little bit of nutmeg grated into your coffee or tea or your golden milk. So again, a lot of these spices that have anti-inflammatory benefits would then therefore have cardiovascular health benefits.
Amazing. What about for memory and cognition, sort of like brain health, memory? Because, brain fog is a real thing.
Absolutely. So I think we have to go back to as you well know, the Ayurvedic principle that all disease and all dysfunction begins in the gut. And we know there's a gut brain axis. And so the diverse array of spices that support a healthy gut microbiome, turmeric actually and curcumin have in small studies shown to improve the integrity of the gut lining. So we want a gut lining that is intact. We don't want that quote unquote leaky gut, which is going to result in things that are not meant to be in our bloodstream, causing toxicity issues, which can then cause inflammation, brain fog. I mean, it's all linked, right? So I go back to the anti-inflammatory spices, the diverse array. I think fennel is really underutilized. I mean, in India, we chew it after every meal, but a fennel tea every night, I think, is a beautiful ritual to curb post-night snacking, boost gut health, and therefore boost mental health. And the other spice that has been studied quite a bit for its effect on mood and mental health is saffron. So it's expensive, but you don't need that much. A few saffron threads in your golden milk, a few saffron threads in your chai. Saffron seems to have compounds that are really, really being investigated for their effects on mood and mental health.
Yeah. So, I think what you're also getting at is sort of back to our conversation right before this, which is that if you use some spice blends, you're going to get effects that are going to support all of these chronic issues, right? And so, while you might, be suffering from a specific issue, right? And dealing with, diabetes or heart disease or what have you, you can focus in on those spices. But again, why not just do a diverse blend of spices, right? Increase that diversity. And you're supporting all of these issues, right? You're really going to be having the health benefits that goes to everything, regardless of whether you have it right now or not, right? And you're supporting your longevity. So I think you're kind of proving the point of what you were saying is like, just have a little bit of all of them together.
Yeah, there's a lot of parallels between, I think, the way spices work and the way your longevity switches work in your book, because they impact more than one thing. They have this kind of cascading effect. And at the end of the day, we are a system. We're not these isolated parts. And these diseases, like you said, we bucket them, but they're all coming from imbalance and dysfunction in overlapping parts of us. So, yeah, we want to kind of address the whole.
I think that's amazing. Now we could just keep talking. I have so many more questions, but I know that we're coming up on the end of our time for this episode. We'll do another one because I think this is really, really important. And I think, for so many reasons, it's something that's accessible. All of us can access this. We can go to the grocery store and pick up spices and add them to whatever we're making at home. It supports the idea of cooking at home. It's using this medicine that we don't have to get a prescription for, right? There's all these reasons that this is so important. So I think that we will do another episode because I think everyone's going to really find this of so much benefit.
Yeah, I'd love that. And you were talking about some of the chronic diseases, just to go back to that really quick.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we don't have spices in isolation. So, for example, when you say cardiovascular disease, I'm thinking, what are foods that we know that can support a healthy lipid profile to minimize cardiovascular risk? Things like soluble fiber, like you find in oatmeal. So now you take your oatmeal and you add anti-inflammatory spices to that.
Right.
So we're almost like building this kind of symphony of ingredients to support our health and our disease risk. Never just one, never in isolation, and really like thinking about the harmony of it all together.
Right. Exactly. So I have one last question for you. My new book is called The Longevity Formula. In your experience, what do you see as the essential formula for longevity, where our health span equals our lifespan?
So we've touched upon a lot of things that are related to physiology, the body, cellular processes, inflammation. So I actually want to go out on a limb and say, I have aging parents now. I see a lot of people in my generation, their parents, their family members are aging. And something that really strikes me is a sense of purpose, like a sense of, why am I waking up today? What is getting me out of bed? It doesn't have to be like, I'm running a nonprofit that's saving the world. It could be like, right now, I'm a grandparent and I love my role as a grandparent, or I'm a community leader in my neighborhood. I help build community gardens, or like, I know my neighbor really relies on me for that cup of coffee and that conversation. I really see a stark difference between people who feel like they're waking up with this deep sense of purpose versus people who don't have that. And I would say that that's a really important, often under-discussed piece in the longevity puzzle.
Yes, I agree with you. I agree with you so wholeheartedly. I think that is so important, having a sense of purpose. So, Kanchan, thank you so much for this conversation. I know that your wisdom is so valued, and I really appreciate you taking all this time to just share your wisdom with us. So thank you.
Thank you, Avanti. It was awesome, and I can't wait to do it again.
Okay, friends, a few thoughts before we close out this episode. The teaching from this conversation that I really want you to walk away with is this: spices are not just seasoning, they are medicine. Now, I would never say don't take a supplement, right? A turmeric pill or a gingerol capsule can absolutely help you because these are isolated compounds and they have real benefits. That's why the supplement industry actually exists. And there's a lot of good science behind all of this. But here's what most of us don't realize: the isolated compound, yes, in a pill, it's doing something, but it's doing something different than the whole spice would do in your food. The whole spice brings the curcumin and the dozens of other compounds that naturally live alongside it in turmeric. That's really where the magic is, right? The other spices that are in the blend, the fat in the meal that helps absorb it, the intention you bring to cooking it, different form, different medicine, different benefits. We talked about this in the episode. And again, the spices that you need, according to Ayurveda, depends also on your dosha. Pitta needs cooling, Vata needs warmth, Kapha needs stimulation. The same kitchen, the same spices, different medicines, different uses. And if this is the kind of conversation you want more of, Dr. Thamit Sethi and I are over at the Weekly Health RX on Substack, where we give you personalized prescriptions, not generic advice, built for you and your biology, specifically in midlife. Come find us at weeklyhealthrx.substack.com. It's free to start. There's also a link in the show notes for you. Thank you so much for being here. And if this episode hit home, please share it with a friend who needs to hear it. And remember, healing isn't just possible, it's in your power. I'll see you again next week. Until then, be well. Thank you for listening to The Healing Catalyst. If you found this episode helpful, please hit follow and share it with a friend. And if you feel inspired, please rate and review because it helps others find this podcast more easily. For more insights and tips, head to my website at avantikumarsingh.com. And to connect with me directly, find me on Instagram at avantikumarsingh. I loved sharing this episode with you. My hope is that you heard something today that sparks a catalyst in your healing journey and helps you build lasting health. Be well, and I'll see you next time. This is a Dante 32 production.